priest talking about the teaching, and they said that the problem with the teaching there is that teachers were more preoccupied with the transmission of knowledge than with the creation, among other values, of a critical spirit. From the social point of view, the educational systems are oriented to maintaining the existing social and economic structures instead of transforming them. Do you think this is a general characteristic of education?
And I think it's more general than, it's not universal, of course, there are exceptions, but substantially I think that's probably true. All of you can check your own experience and see whether it's true. The idea of educating people to challenge, to think for themselves, to create, to challenge what you're saying, for example, that's what an educational objective really should be. You're not giving the student body orders saying, here's what you must believe, but here's what I think, and you tell me whether it's right.
Does that impact on your teaching, the way you try and teach?
That's the way I try. You can tell whether it succeeded.
It worked for me. There's one thing, though, that you wrote, which I kind of took to heart a little bit earlier. I don't know whether I took to heart, but there's a really interesting discussion of the fact that Gandhi apparently thought that persuasion was a form of violence. And you wrote, if you're with children or teaching or involved in a discussion or talking to an audience, ideally you should not try to persuade them. That is, to get them to accept your position. And then you went on to say, this should be true of teaching. There's no point in persuading people. If you're teaching, say, physics, which I thought was a good choice, there's no point in persuading a student that you're right. You want to encourage them to find out what the truth is, which is probably that you're wrong.
Very often.
Yeah, and which is a really important point about teaching. But I was particularly taken with something that you wrote afterwards, for reasons that may be clear. It said, I'm always put off by people who are called good speakers, by those who can rouse an audience. That's just what you do not want. If you have the capacity to do it, you should suppress it. And I thought I want to get you to elaborate.
I think that's right. An orator, rhetoric is the art or science, whatever you call it, of persuading people by appealing to their emotions, their undermining their capacity for independent thought and inquiry, for challenge, for invention, for creation. It's exactly the opposite of what it ought to be. I mean, I have heard speakers who were inspiring, and I can understand the appeal, but people should resist it, I think.
Okay, so I've been trying to think of things to disagree with you on here, and it's going to be hard. But let me put it to you this way, that I've often, with Richard Dawkins, debated the question of how to convince people or how to get people to think critically, and have said that you really, teaching is really seduction in a way, because you can't assume people are interested in what you have to say. If you do, then you've lost a lot of them. So it seems to me that if you're really interested in getting the step of critical thinking, you first have to motivate people to want to think critically, or to want to be interested enough in the topic to think critically. And that's where, if you wish, the idea of sort of rousing and interest. And I don't think if you can, unless you pass that natural sort of suspicion, then I don't think you can get people to the thinking critically unless you sort of...
The right way to motivate people is to bring up issues, problems, puzzles that challenge them, and then ask them, try to help them to think through ways of interpreting, maybe solving these problems. There's an old... if you go back to the Enlightenment, there were kind of two models counterposed for teaching. One was the concept of pouring a liquid into a vessel. And we've all been through that, and as we all know, it's a pretty leaky vessel. When you memorize those books to pass the sociology test, a week later, I'll bet you forgot what the topic was.
It was like Woody Allen. I remember his line about I took a speed reading course and read War and Peace in 5 minutes. It's about Russia. Yeah, anyway, but
the other model, which was counterposed to this, was laying out a string along which the student pursues in his or her own way. So there's some structure to education, but the real task is to make it possible for the student to pursue, to investigate that structure, to explore it, maybe to modify it. Could be the wrong structure. And if you succeed in that, you've actually taught. Well, let me give you an example.
Okay.
The best math course I ever took, graduate course in modern algebra back in the 1940s, the instructor, who was a very good mathematician, would come in, race the blackboard, write down something on the blackboard, look at it, and ask the class, is that a theorem? And the rest of the session was the efforts of the class to either prove or disprove what was up there. The instructor, of course, participated. If things went in the wrong direction, maybe give you some hints, but it was basic. The task was not, look, this is a theorem, here's where I'm going to prove it, but you find out whether this is a theorem or this is false. And that way you actually learn something. You learn how to be a mathematician, not just to discover whether that thing written there is true or false.
To discover for yourself, which is really the only way.
And then it's internalized.
Yeah, then it's internalized, which is, I think, one of the reasons that graduate students should be encouraged to not take classes, actually, is to...
Unless they're classes like this.
Yeah, exactly.